Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. This is adjust this camera just real quick right there. So, this is going to be about Plum Island. Some of you have total information about Plum Island, or you think you do. And some of you are like, what? Is that where they grow plums? Plum Island is a really interesting situation because when you sense and you know and you've seen smoking guns of the crazy people in the world doing crazy things, and then someone pulls a thread out of the sweater and puts a weird animal on the side of a beach, which is picked up in the 21st century, which is funny. This place goes back to 1954. And then people are like, hey, look at this, man. It's on the coast of New York. It's right across the peninsula from Plum Island. And Plum Island is known for creating genetically modified things, right? And then people are like, well, it's just a desiccated raccoon. Just compare all the bones and it's fine. And, oh, fuck you, man. Blah, 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 blah. They get all pissed off that, you're not going down the rabbit hole with them, and that you're supposedly indemnifying crazy, virus maniacs and crazy surgeons and crazy cross-species folks. We know that laboratories around the world have been combining whatever the hell they can combine and letting it go full gestation. The official story is that they're not allowed to let these embryos grow more than a few weeks, and then that Geneva shuts them down. What a crock that is, right? So I'm going to go through the history of first Plum Island and sort of some of the claims that are there because it's so well shrouded. The only thing that we really have is insinuation. And, we'll go through the official story, then we'll go through what we think might have occurred in addition to that. And then we're going to get into some of the genetic procedures to make some of this stuff happen in the world. We're going to talk about some of the above board experimentation that's been going on. And then we're going to conclude with what they probably have done, at least once. So in 1897, this little island, which is the mouth of Long Island Sound, I don't know what the hell they ever call it, like Puget Sound, Long Island Sound, something to do with the word sound means bay. I don't know, maybe because it has a cool sound to it, But they built this lighthouse, and it's called the Plum Island Lighthouse, and that's where it gets its name. And, you can only assume it grew plums at some point. Plums are pretty rugged things. They taste totally genetically modified, I'll tell you that much. It's 5 kilometers long, which is approximately 840 acres of land, which is, quite a stake. Quite a stake of land. Very shortly after that, after World War II, the Army Chemical Corps takes control over it. But by 1954, the United States Department of Agriculture set up facilities to study hoof and mouth, foot and mouth, that's me, hoof and mouth disease, which disturbed livestock. Hoof and mouth disease really is just a generic illness of hoofed animals that makes them terribly ill, which obviously affect a lot of animals that we survive on, from cows that bear milk, cows that bear meat, sheep that bear wool, sheep that bear milk and maybe some meat as well. And so it was just this thing that was disturbing animals generically. It's kind of like their little cold or little flu. Now, what's interesting about the hoof and mouth disease is that, having grown up in farm territory, we have plenty of livestock where I live, especially in Northern California, Northern Kansas, and the stories of hoof and mouth disease coming through were almost non-existent. It wasn't any of the history books or anything like that when I was in the 70s, growing up as a little kid. And that's really odd because some of this stuff we now know is essentially pushed into the narrative of our lives. We hear about it. We never see it, like whooping cough. I've never seen it. They say every once in a while, one kid in New York got it, and you're like, well, who's the kid? Well, we can't tell you. It's, it's HIPAA laws and all that kind of stuff. So a lot of stuff could be completely fabricated out of thin air to create these facilities. Let me know if your folks ever ran a farm, a livestock business, and had the hoof and mouth disease affect their, business, what have you. The symptoms of this foot and mouth disease was blistering around soft tissue areas, fevers, loss of appetite. So imagine you got a bunch of livestock and it's just dying off because of some generic, illness that's out there. So this facility goes from 1954 to 1969 when Richard Nixon kind of says, we're not going to do any more of this sort of biolab stuff. I think at the time, BSL-3 labs were as high as we had gone. And then shortly after that, Geneva steps in with the Geneva Protocol and bans, biological weapon development. Okay. What I find interesting about that, I'm just going to put a footnote to help you guys out, not yelling at the video, is that if you had developed an effective set of weapons to not only attack your enemy, but to attack your own citizens, the interesting thing is that you would want to say that you don't do it anymore, and then you start doing it, right? That way, when these things start popping out, because it was only about a decade later when a hepatitis B vaccine that was given to all these people in San Francisco, they started dying of an immune deficiency disease after a BSL-4 lab had developed for 20 years the exact same thing, which Dr. Watts, a gentleman I can't find anymore online, had found all their documentation from a fiscal CFO level down to the research level. Making people sick is a business. It's just a straight up business. So before you think about, going off into alien territory, they're creating weird hybrids of things, which we're going to get into, or going off and creating, horrible weapons that, would be very evident in war. Think about the oncology business. Think about anything that makes you remotely sick. It's a business. These people do not care if you get sick. And that's a fact. Sorry. So in 2003, this is what's wild. Plum Island is nothing special, right? It's in the New York Bay because it's obviously away from the public such that, the contamination of some sort of, airborne contamination doesn't happen for anything that they're studying, of course. And then the people are still close to society, so scientists want to be able to go see a movie every once in a while, so they're not in the boonies. But they want to tell you that nothing serious ever happened with this. We're going to get into everything that they studied and sort of the claimed effects of what they studied and how they studied it. But by 2003, Homeland Security takes it over because of 9/11. Sounds extremely active, doesn't it, by 2003? In 2008, they decide to move it to Kansas. For those of you in America, you immediately get it. But for those of you not familiar with our maps, Kansas is the most centered state in the entire Union of the United States of America so far. It's where I'm from. In the center of Kansas is a big city called Wichita. And north of that, just about, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, is a town called Manhattan. Just like New York City, Manhattan, Kansas. It was the location of one of the very first IMAX theaters in the central Midwest. You go see it, which is really odd because Wichita is a big city and Manhattan is not. But this place has been riddled with mistakes. And so in 1973, there was a bit of a lost control of one of the foot and mouth strands. In 2004, there was another. 2004, they had 2 incidents where things were starting to get out of control. And I think that a lot of us understand that that's a mechanism. That's a mechanism for deployment. Incompetency with no repercussions that takes massive amounts of lives, official story, and no one's ever fired. With the September 11th thing, roughly about 3,000 people perished in the combination of events, according to the official story. But who lost their job? Nobody. Nobody lost their job whatsoever. A little weird, huh? But in 2004, right around the time they have these two, mistakes, a guy named Michael Correll publishes a book called Lab 257, and it was called the disturbing story of the government's secret Plum Island germ laboratory. Okay. In this book, he starts one of the most famous theories about Plum Island, which is that they invented Lyme disease. And they invented it as a derivative from this foot and mouth research, right? And there's other researchers there too. George Bush Jr. supposedly has Lyme disease. You get it from a tick, is the official story. And it's bacteria that lives inside the tick that transmits to a human being and really messes you up. It kind of gives you an immune issue, although George Bush Jr. seems to be doing just fine. I don't personally have any friends that have ever perished from Lyme disease. But in this book, he also talks about things that you and I may not understand. There's a virus that was the 1967 Dutch duck virus and the West Nile virus of 1999. He essentially is heaping everything into this container inside Plum Island. What you have to understand about books like this is that what if you were the government and you did create these things either through absolutely accidental creation, but you still pushed it out on the public to see what would happen, or you intentionally made them to hurt people and you're just doing tests on them like we've done several times in history, right? So you want an author to get seeded with information that makes them feel like they have a legitimate claim. They write the book, you get them the deal for the book to go public, and then you push it out to the press. Oh boy, conspiracy book, la la la. Because you didn't actually make these things at Plum Island, you bury them inside Plum Island, and the public, if they do buy into it, are immediately buying a bad story. Thus, the government didn't do it. They're completely washed of any responsibility, and you look like a sap to your family. I need you to get hip to these formulas, these bait and switch formulas. Now, because in 2008, this type of research was pushed to Manhattan, Kansas, and that's a horrifying location to be doing this, but what they believe now, I'm sure, is that the BSL-4 lab contingency procedures are so great, including burning the entire place down. Go see Andromeda Strain, the movie, or go and then see my episode Andromeda Strain, where I review it. And it's the worst place because it's in the center of the United States of America. So anything goes bad, oh my God, it just spreads automatically. Official number of BSL-4 labs, which is like the worst of the worst, right? The official number of them in the world is 59. What's interesting about it is that when the Ukraine was raided by Russia, they found 36 more. With all the documentation, locations, movies, but because they have so successfully demonized that country, the average idiot doesn't look at the videos and believes them, right? It's really sad. So in 2016, the entire island goes into this historical society preservation thing. So they've obviously taken 8 years between 2008 and 2016 to clean the whole joint up. Get in there and just bleach it, right? Maybe tear down some buildings that were very evident that certain types of beings were living there that might have been human and whatever. And then take the office buildings and bleach them, literally bleach them out, make sure there's nothing there, and then repaint them, and then do tourist things with them later on in life, right? But that's 9 years ago. I don't know anybody who's gone there. So what are the official story, documentation of this place? Well, I told you what they researched. There was a guy that was smuggled in through Operation Paperclip, and his name is Eric Traub, 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 not quite sure. Obviously a German scientist. And they said that he was, part of the Operation Paperclip thing. And the foot and mouth research. The problem is that what the Germans were actually doing in their research facilities over in Germany during the occupation of Europe and a lot of the concentration camps, which did exist, obviously. I was brought up with videos that I don't know if they're true anymore, but like crazy videos of pouring acid on people's feet and that kind of weird stuff and all kinds of other crazy things, because once you have a group of folks and you don't care how they resolve their lives, then you do all kinds of crazy stuff to them. The United States of America, which we're going to get into the exact years here, we went into mental institutions because a lot of people were abandoned in mental institutions back in the day. And so they just do experiments on them. Give them diseases and let them live out their life and just record how it took over their life. So they could have a list of the symptoms, and they let them go all the way to fatality because they want that control group of like, okay, people catch syphilis, have this issue. People catch tuberculosis, go through this. The official group that was created in 1954 was the Plum Island Animal Disease Center, PIADC. I don't think either one of those are easy to say. But they worked on the foot and mouth disease. They worked on African swine fever, or ASF, which greatly affected wild pigs. And if anybody know about pigs, pigs are extremely resilient creatures, which is why the conquistadors would have them on their boats, because they would just replicate super duper quick. All they need to do is land, give it 6 months to a year, and they got more pigs than they could deal with, which is why the wild boar is over here on the Americas. They worked on swine fever, or classical swine fever, CSF, and two derivatives of foot and mouth disease, one called rinderpest, which was extremely similar, and one called vascular stomatitis virus, which was, again, extremely similar to foot and mouth disease. Now, what's interesting about this BSL 4 labs, which is biosecurity level 4, is that one, if you do watch Andromeda Strain, the movie, which I believe is 1973, they were showing you kind of what these things were going to be all about, which I believe is a Doug Trumbull, Michael Crichton movie. What's the undeniable link is that whatever these BSL-4 labs are researching, they tend to, we tend to, as people, be exposed to the pandemics that they create, right? For instance, they'll go look at Ebola. Then way before there's any outbreak anywhere in the world, then bam, Ebola's out there. Marburg is the current thing they're looking at. And, you'll hear these weird reports. They're trying to create the most insane versions of the things that they have. So if they catch some sort of virus that's doing something, they'll work extra hard. They'll enlist major universities like Harvard Medical School and Stanford University, and it's all in the press. It's all official news. Why would you do that, right? We have an epidemic of fire. Well, okay, so what this university's doing is making the most aggressive fire in the entire world. A fire that can't be put out, like lithium batteries, right? Why would you do that? Why would you go off and create something? Then, of course, there's the cascade of things that have happened over the last, 50 years where, a truck carrying the most deadly virus in the world, not escorted by police or anything, right? I don't know about Europe or other countries, but when we move gigantic pieces of industrial construction or a mobile home, they commandeer the whole highway. There's cops in front, cops in back, there's ambulances, fire departments. They'll move one part for the military in the middle of the night. It's like as big as a house, and they'll move it to some underground facility. You bump into these if you travel. Truckers see them all the time. But when you transport a virus that if it gets loose will kill the entire world, whatever. We just call it Uber Eats, right? We'll just put it in the back, right? It happened a bunch of times. And then, of course, in the midst of these crashes, because they always get in crashes, that's the other thing, right? They hire the most incredible idiots to drive these vehicles. This is all bullshit, but whatever. It crashes. And then, of course, someone goes into the vials in the back and starts rubbing it all over their face and kissing everybody. I mean, it's like the stories are so ridiculous. I'm making that up, of course, but it is not far off from that. It's like, my God, we can transport radioactive isotope bars for nuclear reactors in a way that they won't touch each other and go critical, but we can't do a simple thing that could be killed in 2 seconds, right? It should be like a crash cam. When you crash your car and you got an insurance cam on your windshield, it goes, I sensed a crash, I'm calling the cops. All right. So we put them in containers that if there's a crash, they incinerate. Boom. Well, you got to go back and get some more. We got plenty more in the BSL-4 lab. But why are you having to move these from place to place? And why on earth would you use a car on a road, the most unsafe method of travel? Why not get a nice helicopter, and maybe you move it to an airport, and then you put it in a jet that's just been checked out, just like Air Force One. Thing never goes down, boom. And then you fly it with an escort of Chinooks and Blackhawks and whatever you got. If this spills, the world dies. So, again, this living in a world of incompetency and coincidences is really where you find your most abject morons in the world. It's just the truth. When you go into the BSL-4 contingency plan for when this kind of thing happens within the laboratory, what's funny is they won't really talk about the heavy-duty extermination part, which has been in several films. It does exist. I've checked it out. So, they use disinfectants as much as they possibly can. They pull all the staff to the side and find out who's been infected and who hasn't, quarantine them and help them out. Then they do a post-mortem to find out how it happened and all this other stuff. But technically, if they're really trying to protect American lives and really the global world, they burn it to the ground. They push a button and the whole place burns to the ground. And if you're standing in the middle of it, you're just going to be ashes. And that's what you sign up for when you join one of these institutions. So don't make a mistake. How about that? So what is the theory of this place? I mean, they've got a official story, which sounds pretty feasible, and it could just simply be that. Foot and mouth disease research, a few derivatives, some fevers. But there was, again, this animal. I don't know why it got this name, but they call it the Montauk Monster. For me, it looks like a beaver of some sort, but when this thing came out, I just organically saw it, and then it was on the news here and there for about 6 months, and then someone said, oh, it's a raccoon. And it was from some independent, dude like you and I, just looking at it on a discussion forum. And then what the dude did was he went and looked at all the skeletons of creatures and started comparing it. And it does look like it's a raccoon that's basically lost its fur. It has been in the water for quite some time, so it lost a lot of its girth. Meaning it wasn't a big fat raccoon like the ones around here. And, that's probably what it was, okay? But again, I'm going to repeat this because I think we have to be careful. I could easily make the videos that you see online where I'm just feeding you bullshit 24/7, man. You're like a mushroom, man. I keep you in the dark and I feed you bullshit and you grow. And you think I'm just, oh, man, he is the best conspiracy. And it's all lies, right? The reason why I don't do that is I think I'm actually going to meet God at some point. That's why, right? I could never be a shill. I could never just make stuff up. It's ridiculous. So when we know that this type of research has been done and someone accuses an island, very romantic, doctrine of Ireland, was it the island of Dr. Moreau with Val Kilmer, Marlon Brando. And it's just a weird movie, man. It was probably $20 million shy of not being embarrassing physically with the beings that were in there. But this movie was about this crazy guy. Marlon Brando really dug playing these type of dudes. And this independent guy goes there, and he's not either one of those two. He meets Val Kilmer, who's there, and there's like literally human beings created from a lot of different animals like tigers and bears. Oh my, it's like, and it's mildly entertaining, but it was a very tumultuous movie to make apparently because Brando was definitely struggling with alcoholism, and Val Kilmer's trying to make his mark, and he's a big admirer of Brando, and it just got weird. When you see the film, you're going to feel this weirdness. It's really strange. I'll let the rest of it be a mystery. Believe me, I just gave you a tiny trailer there, a teaser, if anything. But then people took in this film, and they're like, oh, yeah. Then South Park does an episode, oh, yeah. And the thing is we really don't have any physical evidence in any rabbit hole anywhere of seeing these things, these chimeras, right? A chimera is simply a genetically modified being with two or more genetic pools added to it. So if you took a dog and you added a tiger, you'd have a chimera of these two things together. But you could add 50 things to it, an insect, whatever you could get to cross the species barrier, right? So let's get into some of the terminology so at least you have enough to go do some of your own research. I don't think that your AIs are going to be that helpful other than to just simply give you some of the sterile definitions of how this stuff works, which has its value. But there's something called recombinant DNA. And recombinant DNA, which is also rDNA, is the byproduct of trying to get two DNA sequences to coexist in the same double helix and then grow some form of life. There's all kinds of techniques of how they do this. I did an episode where I did, it's something like it's called gene splicing or human gene splicing. It actually shows you some of the methodologies that they did back in the day. I mean, some of these are crazy, taking embryos out of women and using strings to separate them, and it's wild. But this is way below that in terms of its subatomic nature, right? But a guy named Paul Berg in 1972 took a monkey virus called SV40 and mixed it with a lambda virus. And they're not trying to get anything to grow necessarily. They're definitely trying to make sure it doesn't die, but they're not trying to grow a human being or grow some sort of thing. They're trying to basically make the first recombinant DNA, which is a hybrid GMO DNA. All the food that you eat that's GMO has recombinant DNA. It's a byproduct of recombinant DNA. Technically speaking, when they spliced, I think I'm correct in this, although they're not using modern techniques, but when it was 1880s, they made the grapefruit by mixing a lemon with an orange. That is not something that existed in the time of Christ, right? It was something they created. Interesting, right? So this guy starts the process of moving this forward. By 1982, a guy, what was his name? He manages in 1982 to use the non-toxic E. coli virus, which is, E. coli bacteria, that lives in the guts of, all of us. There's E. coli that's terminal, and there's E. coli that is very natural, and it's in all beings, and it helps us process our foods. But they were able to get the insulin from a human being, the sequence of insulin, and get that thing to grow inside E. coli. And they fermented the E. coli, which means they grew it, and it started creating insulin, which is where all the insulin shots come from that human beings take. That was masterminded in 1982. And I guess we could say as we continue to eat like slobs and get diabetic, and they'll tell you that's in your DNA and all. The only thing in your DNA is your family teaching you to eat badly, right? I used to support with my game company a company from Massachusetts with this PhD specialist from Harvard University who had diabetesgames.com, and he was using us to make games to teach people to do what they need to do. Check your insulin, eat right, exercise. But when we got him in private phone calls, this dude was like, hey man, there's people who are diagnosed with type 2, and if they really get serious about exercise and diet, they just clean this stuff out, and they're basically asymptomatic. So just know it's really about obesity and the horrible food supply that we have here in the United States and probably abroad, right? But some of the interesting things that they have actually done above board. In 1984, they created a sheep-goat because those are very close species. 2003, China took human DNA and fused it with a rabbit ova. and they were trying to make chimeric, embryos, and eventually, I'll just keep going here. In 2007, University of Nevada, they created a sheep that created 15% human blood, and the rest was sheep blood. The idea is that we can somehow use these animals to create like human parts, right? Which we're going to get into. 2017, the Salt Institute in the United States created a human pig embryo. And of course, they say, they only let him live for like a few weeks and then they terminated him. Right. 2019, Juan Carlos from Salt Institute created a human monkey chimera. Terrifying, right? And supposedly, I've seen I've seen photographs of that particular experiment where you really look like you're looking at a chimpanzee human thing where it barely grew any hair. And there are definitely hairless chimpanzees that happen naturally. Not very common, but they happen, right? But they just look like, who knows? If you've ever seen the movie Aliens 4, which is obviously completely fictional, Sigourney Weaver's in a laboratory where she realizes that the company that found that alien got back some of the DNA and were experimenting like crazy on a foreign planet. So that, again, just like Plum Island, it's not near Earth, but all these, unstabilized beings had problems, which we're going to get into. More monkey humans in 2021. So they're working on it. They're working on it right now. So what I went off and did is try to figure out what's the oldest, bizarre stuff they might have done in the past that indicates that they do this kind of stuff, right? Well, the United States from 1932 to 1972, they call it the Tuskegee syphilis study, where without really informing people, they gave them syphilis and watched what took place. But they used mental institution patients, but perhaps the families that completely abandoned them. Of course, the Nazis were accused from 39 to 45, doing all kinds of experiments on folks, and those are just infinite. Then they have what's called Unit 731. It's a Japanese, Imperial Japanese Army's unit where they performed all kinds of vivisections, used biological weapon testing, forced infections, leading to numerous deaths. And the Willowbrook hepatitis study, this is where they got to the mental institution, 1956 to 1970, where they basically worked on disabled children. Lovely, right? And then, of course, MKUltra, which officially has the years of 1953 to 1973, where they gave psychotropic drugs to people. And the official story is to study mind control and the integration of techniques resulting in severe psychological and physical harm. Lovely, right? Okay. Before we speculate on some uses of this technology, I want to review with you mRNA. It's something that has been introduced into human beings. Most of the clinical studies have been very public, and the immune response for most of the animals up until 2021, the reaction, the immune system in animals reacted so violently, this is all official stuff, right, that the animals eventually died. So I went and researched really the step-by-step process of this because, again, I have a lot of skepticism about some of the fear-mongering around some of this direct effect, but I am by no means encouraging anyone to get what we call in this show the drink. What do you call little tiny drinks at the bar? Those things. Just to preface this real quick, I think it's the other ingredients that go along with any scare tactic to make you take the drink that are really the most harmful thing out there. But what this technology is for the spike protein especially is they take a lipid. And this was something they figured out. This is all official story stuff, okay? This is not necessarily my opinion. I have not confirmed any of this kind of stuff, nor do I support this at all, right? There's ways of staying healthy, okay? But the mRNA technique was to find a sequence, a messenger DNA sequence that makes something occur, like the one that makes insulin inside the E. coli. It is literally the instruction that has a go verb on it. When you get this, make this happen. Create this, right? Well, the idea was they want to inject it in you, and they want it to live for just a few hours to a few days, and then they're all dead. Like your immune system gets rid of them. Now, I know a ton about the human cell. I put in massive amounts of research. And just to refresh you guys, when I took high school physics, which was not anything average because my teacher was an absolute genius, his wife had just died of cancer. And so he turned it into a molecular biology class and physics class all at the same time. Plus, I took sound waves from him. So we also studied the actual manipulation of sound waves, radiation, isotopes, sun, everything on the human body at a genetic level. Then I studied under Bruce Lipton, who has some incredible books. He's a gifted prodigy child of especially The Wisdom of Your Cell. He's got a book called The Wisdom of the Cell. It's about 700-something pages. Definitely highly recommend it. And the book's about $80. And he reads it beautifully if you get the audiobook. So what they were doing initially was injecting this stuff into animals, and the immune system would just kill this mRNA stuff. And it in general is extremely fragile stuff. So just containing it in a bottle was really, if it heated up too much or cooled down too much, it could just rip to shreds with the chaos of any type of heat, or get too brittle when it got too cold. And so what they discovered was encapsulating it with a lipid, which just think of as like a little snot ball, and injecting it into the body gets it to enter the cell. The lipid is the guy who knows the password to the speakeasy door, right? So they slide that door open. What's the password? The lipid goes, Shazbot. And he goes, come on in, man. And so it goes in. Then the lipid dissolves because the cell will destroy it. And there's your messenger RNA. So what does it do? Well, technically speaking, this is the claim. It tells the cell itself to create this spike protein on the outside. So the big question was, if that cell divides, does it continue spreading this spike protein? Now, the official story is no, it doesn't. It does not continue to replicate on the external cell that's mitosis into two cells, right? We don't know if that's there. The CDC effectively erased a paragraph that said this stuff is temporary in your body. So unless you're a laboratory guy and you have access to the methods of doing this, you'll be the only person that could confirm that. But in terms of you being genetically modified, that's where I think we can safely say that the nucleus of your cell holds the chromosomes, right? And again, Hollywood wants you to believe that chromosomes are 100% double helix DNA nucleic acid chains, right? So it's got 4 combinations on an ACT, like the word act, and the letter G, okay? So ACTG are the letters that they use, right? I don't know why they picked those letters. And that is 50% of your chromosome on average. Okay. There's more things to your chromosome than those 2 components, but the proteins are your instruction manual of how to build what you are. The DNA, the Genome Project, is just the Legos that you're built out of. Considering the fact that there's only 4 Legos that everything's made out of, ACTG, well, no wonder we're like a housefly or a monkey or a pencil, right? There's only 4 Legos in this set, and it's brilliantly very diverse. It makes the rest of us, right? Okay. Makes us all different. Your genetic code, in that particular sense, has not been changed by messenger RNA. You will replicate your DNA every time that your cell procreates. That's not the scare. The scare is that perhaps, maybe, the stuff on the outside of the cell does continue to message the new cell. The official theory is that your immune system will find those spike proteins and kill them. And that's probably true. It'll kill a shit ton of them. Your immune system is an amazing thing. Once it finds a foreign invader, it creates an antibody, and then it starts killing it, right? And it goes in your lymphatic system, and it becomes basically a dictionary library of what those antibodies are. Now, we know from chickenpox, Measles, mumps, once you catch that one time, you usually never catch it again. The only exception might be if you travel to another part of the world and chickenpox is way different in India versus Kansas, and you might actually catch the different strand. And then you have to fight it off again, which you don't want to do in your older age because your skin doesn't repair as quickly, right? But we know the antibodies last forever. Otherwise, I'd be continuing to catch chickenpox over and over and over again if they ever deteriorated. So if you do get a particular spike protein in your system, you should have a dictionary lookup for that for the rest of your life. Except the weird thing is, the official story is that those actually go away over time. Or the mutations of the virus that you're currently fighting need modification, which is why they come up with all these crazy names for them, right? The idea was that the thing that kicked our butts for 3 years didn't get sequenced properly, which is why there's like $1 million or $2 million reward out there for anybody who can prove it. The official story is that was sequenced, and it was just shy of 30,000 sequences of this messenger RNA, or basically the triggering sequence that makes it occur. Some influenza strands are down to 16,000 or 17,000, somewhere in there. So you can actually have something pretty substantial around 15,000 sequences, right? Just something to keep in the back of your pocket there. So technically speaking, if you could get a clean version of one of these triggering mechanisms, and if we could prove that this stuff does deteriorate as cells replicate and as your immune system wakes up to it, you could have a safe technology. The problem is that there's tons of claims that this isn't the case. But the other one is that you would somehow be able to touch a person in a certain way, and that stuff comes off on you. Don't know if that's possible. I think that when you get this drink in you, right, it is inside you. It is inside your blood supply. If you drank it through your mouth, you probably wouldn't have much occurring except for the other chemicals that can mess you up. Aluminum, organic mercury, maybe some nano-sized shavings of various particles, that kind of stuff. That's the kind of stuff you don't want in your body. But again, your digestive system is a completely different track. Typically, if it's not too small, like nano-sized stuff, to get into your blood supply. But they're making stuff really tiny now, so we have to be concerned about everything. But organic mercury, just so you understand, if you spilled a little bit on your hand, you could be dead in less than 60 days of what would be technically, if we just brought in your dead body to a pathologist and said, look at the brain and tell me why this patient died, they'd say, man, they died of Alzheimer's. That's what it does. It creates amyloid plaque clusters in your brain. That's a physical destruction of the brain. The ironic thing is they tell you that stuff's a natural thing in the genome of man. But when you study this really famous woman in the 80s, early 80s, and the guy Chubby Emu did a whole episode on her. He's the Asian doctor who does these amazing sort of Paul Harvey recaps of people doing really dumb things. But this woman was not dumb. She was an expert lab technician, and she spilled quite a bit of it on a rubber glove on her hand of organic mercury, which looks like water. Okay, she knew she was screwed because she knows that the permeability of the glove was not going to stop that stuff from going through the glove and right into her skin. She runs over to a sink. This is the story. She pulls it off. She's trying to rinse. Really, about with the 10 seconds of rinsing, she's done. That's about all she could do. And immediately she started having Alzheimer's issues, and she literally told her friends, I'm dead. And I think within 45 days, she died. And in honor of her mistake, they now have this Michael Jackson glove that's kind of like, looks like an Evil Dead glove, right? And it's non-permeable, and you wear these now when you mess with large amounts of organic mercury because it's so deadly. So it being inside your little drinks, every single one of them, you're just crazy. I mean, that's why people are starting to, peel off really early. And the worst thing about Alzheimer's, man, and I took care of an old woman. I should say I visited her at the old folks home. I've told the story before, but she was completely physically fine, but just mentally gone. So sad. So have countries actually done these kind of experiments and allowed beings to continually grow. Well, let's just find out how curious we are as a human being. I think that the average human being would be utterly terrified to say, "Oh, guess what we did? We mixed a spider and a human being, and we got one in this room right here. You want to see it?" You would be so terrified of what you would see, let alone being trapped in the room with that being, right? But you mean to tell me that a scientist with the capability of doing this would not do it? Do you really think that that's the case? I think most of you grown men know, oh, hell yeah, they would do that, right? They want to see what will happen. Anything and everything they can mix with a human being, they want to see what will happen. What if they created in their mind a superhuman being? You mix a mantis, a praying mantis insect, with an ectoskeleton, right? With a lunged, superior, brilliant creature like man. Do you get some instinctual sort of programming from the mantis or from the spider or for some other thing? The tarantula hawk or whatever it is, and do you get a little bit of that DNA in the man? And imagine what would the female look like? If you mixed it with a gorilla, do you get like a giant super soldier that you could actually talk to and you would get Planet of the Apes? What if you did actually encounter aliens in 1947 in Roswell or Puget Sound? But the thing with Roswell is better because you actually have 3 captured aliens. 1 is alive and 2 are dead. And that leaked out, that this actually occurred because so many people saw this. So many people in the military saw this. People got murdered because of it. Maybe you get their DNA. Talk about species barrier, I don't know. But you never know, right? What if they just figure out how to cross these recumbent DNAs together from anything? There's not any barriers anymore. They've realized, oh, it's because we were doing that this thing starts to reject itself. But now we can just push them together and they always work. Well, what was the thing that we learned in Aliens 4? And it was based on a lot of pretty decent science. But I'll give you an easier one. There are a lot of you guys out there chili heads. You love spicy chilies. The Carolina Reapers, the Trinidad Scorpions, the Buchalucas, the Seven Pots. There's a bunch of them now, right? Well, there's some geniuses out there who know how to create these things. Pepper X, I forgot that one too. But they have to stabilize them. That's the big thing about these chilies. Now, with chilies, they don't have lungs and brains and eyeballs and that kind of stuff. So it's a very interesting process. They still have to stabilize the chili. What does that mean? What does that really mean? Well, what that means is, right now, a habanero, or my friend likes to call them jalapenos on purpose, but jalapenos, they're very stable. You just get, there's different species of them that grow in different areas. But if you've got a whole batch of them from one batch, and you find them at the same age, of course, because the capsaicin is going to ramp up over time, especially the tiny red ones that turn into your peppers you put on pasta and pizza and that kind of stuff. I've grown those myself. Man, those things just grow in anything, man. But the tips of them get really saturated with the capsaicin that drips off the placenta inside. So if you just say, I'm just going to eat the tip, good luck, man. You better be good. You better be good with that heat, right? But what they want is, as they grow these things over and over and over again, they want the heat to be identical. They want the experience to be identical. And so they keep plucking from their plants a particular pepper. I think what they ended up doing is they end up tasting it, recording it, then taking the seeds out if it's a good, stabilized, hot seed, and then they continue to grow that one. And they just weed out the ones that had defective seeds until they get a really good strand. I don't know if they're doing some type of recombination or recumbent thing, but they get it stabilized. But when you start having an intelligent, living being that's like, again, has a vascular system, a brain, eyeballs, that kind of stuff, oh boy. If you were to ask the guy that grows the Pepper X's, I forgot his name, how difficult it is just to stabilize a pepper, and then you ask him, well, what about a human being with a spider? You have to understand, insects don't have what we have, right? They have these little bladders. They're almost just receptors. inside their little ectoskeleton bodies, which are perforated on the side. Oxygen goes into that little cavity and gets metabolized almost like an open sac from the lung of a human being, right? The same sac DNA is most likely indicative of what they breathe on. They don't have the lung. Okay. Well, gills, which are absolutely a phenomenal invention. I mean, a fish breathes in water. A freaking fish has got this amazing gift called a gill, and it pulls the oxygen out of the water. And of course, they're all cold-blooded, right? But a human being is massively complex. I don't know how complex the interior of a spider is, or I've seen diagrams my whole life, or a praying mantis, or take just your most sophisticated insect. But they are just a tiny smidgen of the DNA of a human being, at least the protein patterns of a human being. So if you start mixing that stuff together, well, immediately you don't have the functional compatibility. It's like taking the Windows operating system and trying to just insert the same machine code into a Macintosh computer. Or taking your Windows, your desktop computer and putting that machine code in your telephone. You know it won't work. They talk to different microchips. They talk to different displays. It's a completely different animal. Pardon the pun. But now, isn't it weird that a guy figured out the mRNA of insulin through experimentation on animals and studying the pancreas of animals? They were able to find out what DNA sequence creates insulin, one of the most prized possessions of the human body. Insulin is necessary to process sugar. Insulin has to wrap sugar in the body and smuggle it into the cell so that it can be combusted into energy. Without it, you go into hypoglycemia. You can go into diabetes, where you're basically just winding down because your energy levels are off. You get insulin shock if you have too much insulin, not enough sugar. It's just, the balance inside the human body is phenomenal. And if you've been sick, you understand. Your pH balance gets off. Your pH balance goes negative or massively positive, and you're now going to get sick. Which is why things like lemon juice, sea salts, anything that balances your alkaline in your mouth and your body, well, if you're alkaline, you can't get sick. You just can't. By the way, there's some scare that the pink sea salts are made out of a very, very radioactive salt. So you might want to do research on that, but there are good sea salts out there. I don't know if you get some meter that can sense, gamma radiation or beta radiation to see what kind of, electron cloud is coming off that bad boy. But I've said it several times on the show, in my alien episodes, let me give you a full spectrum of what could be possible if they could create some type of human chimera, right? And again, through sheer brute force, and the more the AI starts to learn about proteins, I studied with... I just basically made friends with Dr. Panja from Folding at Home from Stanford University, listening to them write software to figure out how proteins were folding. You put that in some sort of AI, like a big machine learning thing, or you start putting it into the quantum computer models with, say, 50 to 100 stable qubits, and you have, let's just say you have really good data to give it. This is before, this is after. This is, the protein before it folds. This is protein after it forms and starts doing its instructions to the human body. If it could start figuring out how all these proteins work, it could, technically speaking, tell you that's not going to be compatible with this, or here's the mRNA sequence in this spider to give you 8 eyes. And go ahead and put that in a human being. It's suddenly on the face of a human being, in the forehead, like I got a nice big forehead, right? And in the cheekbones and maybe on the side of the head, you start getting extra eyeballs. And the brain starts creating receptors for these extra, retinas that are available to provide more data. Now, according to some anthropologists, they claim that the visual cortex of man is five slices of cheese, and there's a protein blocker down the first one that your visual data comes to It crawls across half of one slice of your visual cortex and is stopped by a protein blocker, which they describe as nothing shy of intelligent design. Like someone designed our visual cortex to cut off 90% of our entire visual spectrum, as if we have been designed not to see the other 90% of what's available to us. Fascinating, right? But let's say you want to fake an alien invasion on Earth. What's it going to require? Well, apparently we're so stupid today that just white lights in the sky is just, that's an alien, man. Or drones, where they hide the fan inside of a more elaborate body and they fly it around. That's UFOs. Most people look at a SpaceX launch, and when the boosters come off the side, the main rocket comes off, or the two boosters come off with the Falcon 9, that's the UFOs up there, right? It's like, no, it's a rocket, dude. You can see it if you just continue to pay attention or catch it early. But you need to create something that's going to resemble a gray alien. And again, with the super tech out there and with biolabs with infinite amount of money to do process of elimination on the DNA, you never know how far they could take it. We're not privy to that information. If you think about it, look at the alternate energy sources we have here on Earth. Solar panels and wind farms, the two worst alternatives of creating energy by natural means. They're the worst. The two bottom of the barrel technologies that have ever been invented. That's what we're given. So you take a military, you take some sort of, it's all military, right? It was the Army Corps of Chemical Corps, Army Chemical Corp or something like that took over Plum Island in 1954. Okay, it's military controlled, which means our tax dollars are paying for this wild stuff. Whether it's Plum Island, I don't think you really need to worry about it. I am sure that something like the island of Dr. Moreau or the Jurassic Park island exists somewhere. I don't think dinosaurs ever existed, but, go see my episode on that if you believe that's true. But you get a human being and you start splicing in stuff that's going to alter the DNA. Maybe you do process of elimination on the geometry of a human being. You find the messenger RNA sequences that actually control the shape of the skull. You start looking at the shape of other animals with different shaped skulls, and you start finding their sequence. And all you're doing is inserting different, modifications, and you get a bunch of weird stuff, and they die real early because they're not stabilized, remember? It caused some other problem. Okay, but eventually, from 1947 to 2025, they've mastered it. They have something that is very, very close, if not spot on, I'm making this up, of a gray alien. They don't get taller than 4 feet. They only have 4 fingers. They don't have any opposing thumbs. They have big almond eyes with real eyes underneath, and these are just lenses on top. It seems like a very difficult thing to me. But they create this species, and it could be a totally different species. It could be lizard-based. You never know, right? And then they start hatching on the internet this David Icke stuff, that they're all these lizards, right? The dude's never seen one in his entire life, but he believes they exist. Holy mackerel, that sounds really familiar to every religion I've ever heard in my life, right? So they got this thing. Maybe even they feed that guy with the story. And he makes money from it, and all of a sudden he takes hits from it too. But now they have a ship. Remember, within the first 4 or 5 episodes of the show Outer Limits from 1963 to 1965, they did this. They did what I'm saying in an episode from 1963. They created a human chimera. Then they built a ship for him. They gave him a laser pistol. Okay, something that didn't exist in the normal world. Then he gets in the ship and he screws up and he lands in the wrong place, and he is an abomination of weird crap. It's really crazy. But he lands on the edge of town instead of landing in D.C. like he's supposed to, like the day the Earth stood still did with Klaatu, right? And some farmers see the guy, and for whatever reason, he takes his laser pistol because he's not right in the head anymore. He's feral, kind of, and he shoots at him and blows up their car. And so they shoot him with the rifle. It's a fatal wound, but he continues living long enough to get to the laboratory where his wife, who's been told he's been killed in an accident, kind of feels him and knows he's still alive. And she comes to the lab and she realizes what they did. And they all drew straws. It could have been any one of the scientists in the room, but he drew the straw. And they tell her that. She's pissed off at him, but he dies on the floor. So, you take this Chimera technology that's just off the chain, funded infinitely, and we're talking about America with trillions of dollars, Russia with trillions of dollars. Maybe they have an ethical barrier, but they don't do it. I don't know. Then China, you can get them to do anything, right? India, same old thing. Anybody with money can engage in these experiments. It would only be your belief in God that would stop you from doing this crazy shit, right? And so you fill up a vehicle, just like the episode of Outer Limits. You raise these beings in some wild environment. You build a wild environment, not some warehouse, but some cool Obi-Wan Kenobi cave. It's all beautiful and organic. And the controllers from the government tell these kids who grow up to be something, right? And they say, man, what if they only live like, I don't know, 20 years? It's like they're dead 20 years because the sequence is bad. So they just say, tell them any story they want. And they go, you're from another planet. And your parents died in a crash, or they just died of natural causes. And we're teaching you your language, and it's all this, click-clack language or whatever it is. The UFO lands in the circle in your neighborhood. Door opens up, and out step 3 to 4 of these beings. You are now going to have to reconcile in your brain whether you think that's real or not. Because it could be fake, right? There's deep fake for you at a level you probably never conceived of if you just found my show. Now, here's your other moral hurdle to get through. Let's say through artificial intelligence, through this massive quantum computer capability. And if you don't know what quantum computers are and you want to know, I have an episode on it where I break it down so you can understand what it is. You don't have to be scientific. But they figure out how to create stable modifications of men. Wild modifications. More stronger skeletons, stronger skin. We have ectoskeletons instead of normal flesh. Our eyes are phenomenal. We can see like satellites, right? Like telescopes and microscopes. We just look down and adjust our eyeballs to see something at some, not subatomic level, but at least some microscopic level. What if you just looked at your cells and you could see, oh, look at that one, it's dividing. What if your intelligence blew up? Because whatever it is, whatever a jumping spider needs to know to do the little, think about a jumping spider. This is crazy. Unlike a cat that will look at the dresser from the bed and totally miscalculate that jump and jump straight head into the dresser, jumping spiders, I've played with them several times in my lifetime. I think they're the cutest things on earth, at least when they're tiny. When they look up at you, it's really funny when they turn around and look at you, and you can put your finger down, they'll hop on your hand. You can't even feel them. They're so light. And then you can carry them slowly to a new surface, and you see them like a cat. They turn, and they want to get on your mirror. They want to get on your dresser. They want to get on something else. And you can see them just kind of rocking back and forth, and all of a sudden, bam, it's like light speed. They're on the other surface. They never make a mistake. They never jump unless it works. That's calculus, right? That's like Napoleon shooting cannons. That's what he got famous for. He was a calculus major. All right. So you put that little bit in there, that little tiny microscopic brain that's inside of a jumping spider. Whatever the hell that neural net is, you imbue a human being with that. And so then we can jump around like Spider-Man. Think about Spider-Man. He shoots webs from his wrist, right? He can squirt it out and he can cut it off and jump and what if they got a human being that at least had a tail or some crazy gross shit like that, and it wraps you up and puts a necrosis venom in you and he just drinks you. I think the possibilities are absolutely endless. Now, the other heavy conspiracy defense shield around this kind of thing for people who don't want to believe. And this one might actually have some legs to stand on. Is that they tell you things like, well, we definitely went to the moon because think about 10,000 people were involved in this, and they'd have to keep 10,000 people quiet, which is a stupid argument because you just compartmentalize the whole thing up to the very top, and only the tip of the iceberg knows that they're not going, right? But with making weird human beings in a lab, man, you would have to have one hell of a psych test, wouldn't you? Are you okay with creating beings that die and suffer for the sake of science? I think if some people perhaps were born into religion, divorced it because of science, saw horrific creations, and then rediscovered God, they might blow a whistle. I've looked for those whistleblowers. Most whistleblowers are created by the groups that are trying to hide themselves, and they throw you way off the path, right? But the moral thing I was going to get to is this. What if man created a superior man? You don't even call it man. It's some chimera thing. It has a new name. But it's extremely stable. Has all these capabilities. And man starts taking the planet to a new level. What if even just being an aggressive, greedy moron starts to go away? And then we look back, let's say that you and I are one of these chimera, modifications. And we're having an intellectual conversation because that's what we can have with our unified brains. And we start looking at, a lot of human beings thought this was extremely immoral. Tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of beings died so that we could exist. But now, with perhaps, things like Earth's not going to last forever kind of thing. I think it's going to be around for a lot longer than we are, but let's just say there's some natural sequence going on Earth that takes a lot of human beings out. What if there's another huge expanding event that creates another giant flood or something worse? But we're now surviving much better because now we can climb up a mountain face like a spider. What if our intelligence is so high we can find solutions to things a lot better? Would that be morally okay? Has it ever happened before? I'm going to give you an interesting sort of non sequitur because there's the theory that we were dropped off here on Earth. And I have episodes where I'm telling you, man, there's a fair amount of evidence that man just might have been dropped off. And I don't have any problem with God just going, day 6, boom, you're there. I don't have a problem with that at all. But if you look at the planets, here's your non sequitur. You got the sun on one side, and let's just go with traditional theories. And believe me, I'm with you about the moon being the same size as the sun. That is a weird one, man. Something funky's going on. We might be fighting over just being in a matrix, So keep that in mind as you disown anyone in your life because of it. The difference in beliefs, I should say. But it looks to me like the planets come out of the belly of the sun. There's some sort of cyclical thing. Mercury is really tiny because it's fresh. And as it gets injected with the ethereal winds of the sun, you can call it electromagnetic energy if you want. The core is obviously not nickel iron because there's no magnetism after 6,500 degrees Fahrenheit. So that's been a lie you've been told your whole life. So the center of the Earth, as proven by Nikola Tesla in Springfield, Colorado, he proved that the center of the Earth is a plasma ball of energy spinning in a torus like a donut. Okay. And so it injects as it makes its way further away from the sun. Okay. It gets to the shape of Venus when it gets to Venus's orbit, and it gets to the size of Earth when it gets to Earth. Something went wrong with Mars. It's not so big, supposedly, right? I haven't been there. I haven't measured it. But then there's that meteor belt between Mars and Jupiter, and then everything turns into gas giants. Pluto being declassified as a planet, it might be simply because it wasn't big enough to be considered a planet, because if it was a planet, it would have turned into a gas giant. They don't tell you the Paul Harvey to the story because they don't want you to know how the system works. But what would that moment look like when it gets to the meteor belt? Well, if for any reason the planet could survive and gets to the meteor belt, it's going to start getting pummeled by the meteor belt. But what would be the event to turn a planet into a gas giant? Because that's just the mathematics after that point, right? And the meteor belt's so massive, supposedly, right, that you're talking about multiple crusts having burst, and all that those little pieces are evenly distributed roughly in that belt. Well, let's just take Mars. At some point, the event where it expands beyond the point where the crust can actually hang on to that magnetic core, it would burst, break, and collapse, probably ejecting some of its stuff into that belt, and then it's going to get pummeled. And then if it survives the belt past that point, I don't know if the belt expands or whatever, then you start turning into a gas giant. Well, that would mean that a lot of these, if you study the black box conspiracies of Saturn worship, that we used to live on Saturn, but when it was way closer to the sun, and when it got to that point of rupturing, we would jump to the next planet that was going to start turning into a Gaia level planet. So Venus, which is supposedly, covered in sulfuric acid and all this other crazy stuff, that by the time it hits the notch of orbit that's around Earth's orbit, it gets a Gaia designation. It starts creating water. It starts terraforming itself naturally so that living creatures could be on it. What if we find this moment where we jump perfectly over to the other one? Maybe we go underground for a while. Who knows? But with this Chimera human, maybe we're smart enough to pull it off. Maybe human beings are smart enough to pull it off. Don't know. But what if the story was, just think of this as a movie, you create the Chimera human that is smart enough and rugged enough to withstand the horrible conditions of a terraforming Venus. And you hop over to Venus, Earth goes off and gets crushed, turns into a gas giant because there's not much holding it together. Plus, it's going to continue to get injected, so it's going to continue to get its diameter, right? But it's only going to be proportional to its original size. So somehow Jupiter must have been a pretty damn big planet if this theory were true. We have to explain how those things got there somehow, and no one does. Nobody does, right? Well, they just arrived one day, They just got into orbit around, a gas giant got into orbit around the sun. That doesn't make any sense. As far as the link with Lyme disease, it's a bacteria called Borrelia bacteria that exists inside the tick as a living virus, a living bacteria. And so when it's sucking on you, it puts a paralyzing chemical in you so you don't notice the bite so much, so it can feed on you for a while. And when it gets in you, if it multiplies and your immune system doesn't nail it within 3 to 30 days, you start getting headaches, tiredness, and if not treated, you can get an autoimmune deficiency disease from it. The invention of Lyme disease would simply be identifying this bacteria and then spreading it. Again, in ticks or what have you, but it is a very natural thing. People are getting bitten by ticks and this is spreading. All of the foot and mouth research doesn't have any Borrelia bacteria involved with it at all. So it's a totally different strand of stuff. So for it to be the inception point of this, you're talking about a bacteria that's probably existed for a very long time. The other thing we have to take into account is that if you're living in 2025, then you're within 150 years of life on Earth that has discovered a lot of cause and effect situations with these sorts of things. So we discovered what was making us sick, and it could be easily linked or construed with some BSL-3 laboratory on Plum Island when it doesn't really have to. People died and got sick of stuff all the time. We didn't know what the hell it was. So now we have this Pandora's box. We know that they are doing, recombinant DNA experiments around the world. We know that they're never going to stop doing those experiments because the curiosity itself. What if they came up with something interesting, right? Haven't you seen the rat that grew the human ear on its back? And they could cut that off and it would be compatible with you. So if you lost your ear in a fire, imagine growing your face on the back of some turtle, whatever, and you can cut it off, put it on your face, and you have your face back. It's like you'll hate that technology until that saves your kid's life from looking maimed, or a soldier comes back from war, or an industrial accident, right? I'm not defending this at all in terms of crazy chimera research. There's a point when you do cherish the grand design of man. You do. You cherish the place that you're in, and you realize that we don't need to do these things. If we had a situation where the sun changed and our atmosphere changed, or something that's killing off all of mankind, and we need the research to save man, then we'd probably have a completely different tune for at least some of us. And some of us would just simply say that's God's exit sign blinking. We're all supposed to just renew, like Logan's Run. We're just supposed to get out of here. And it's okay. You're not a body. You're a soul. Relax, right? A sociopath is obviously a person that lacks a tremendous amount of emotion. They simply don't manufacture the emotions anymore. And so they are capable of being scientists on levels that you and I simply can't conceive. This is the workforce that empowers much of what's going on. They're promoted into areas of military where some pretty nasty stuff needs to happen according to some psychotic general or some psychotic leaders or what have you, the people that aren't elected, but they run the place, right? Now, there was a video I posted on our Telegram, which is Deep Thoughts channel on Telegram. Go look it up if you want, like literally probably 50 posts a day about what's going on in the world. Much different tone than the normal show. So if you're not into politics or strange things happening in the world, that's probably not for you. But I posted a video with a woman, I forgot what she called it, but it was the idea that they're incubating up these little human cells. They're using brain stem cells, which actually create little tiny eyeballs. They're damn near microscopic. And she was trying to suggest that there was technology that attached to these things and they were being sold inside microchips. Biological matter being sold inside of a microchip is just pure fantasy, in my opinion. You couldn't keep anything alive being bombarded by electrons, especially at a microscopic level. It would simply tear it to pieces. Which is why when viruses leave your body, okay, if they're not encapsulated in some mucus, they're living in a storm of chaos that will rip it to shreds, right? It will utterly rip it to shreds the second it leaves your mouth if you cough. But if you do have a fluid that's encapsulating a virus, you do increase its ability to survive. And so you could kiss someone and give someone something that you have. So what I don't understand about the Lyme disease is that if you have a bacteria in you that's causing all these immune deficiencies issues, that they should just literally be quarantined from society because that bacteria is a living being that could easily be transmitted to another human being. Because that's not actually occurring, I don't understand it. I don't understand how it's possible. People make love and they share a lot of DNA when they do that kind of stuff. And so you would think that it would be well known by this point that if your husband had it or your wife had it, you'd have to be careful with swapping liquids and fluids. And, when you sleep in a bed together, you get really close to each other and you just never know. Bacteria can be, under the right conditions, preserved for at least a few seconds of life outside the human body, right? So anyway, hopefully you found this kind of informative and interesting. As far as Plum Island being the dead center, epicenter of all this research, I doubt it. I think that if I were them, I wouldn't. You might do it for a really short period of time, but I would definitely, if I were these psychotic people, I would definitely create laboratories like the Andromeda strain laboratories, which is essentially a science fiction version of a BSL-4 lab. You really should see that movie. If this content interests you at all, go see that movie. You can buy it on Amazon. It's $4 or whatever. It's definitely worth your time. But anyway, if you haven't been to the website, deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. We have video for those of you on audio on video. I do apologize. I'm really late moving things to the podcast side of things. We have a store with all new stock on there, so that's good. And we've picked some videos that you hopefully dig up there. And everything is indexed up there. I have done 808 episodes. This is 809 right now. But there are probably 50 that are missing. Probably 30 I've taken off. And and at least 30 were, or 20 were like chaos reports that I just took off because they're topical. But I'm doing the chaos. I'm not doing chaos anymore. I'm doing big picture over on Rumble. So if you like that kind of stuff, get over there. They're going to continue to evolve. But I do like to wait for things to occur before I create an episode so we have something to talk about. But anyway, for those of you coming in through Patreon and PayPal, thank you so much. Make it happen. Take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you on the next Deep Thoughts. Over now. Meaning it was less than 10,000 nucleic acid. I'm just saying it again.